All right, man, welcome to the show, and welcome to the show if you are partners with a man, lovers of a man, friends of a man, or just appreciate men in general. Today, we have a really interesting topic to go into, porn, and how to navigate porn, how to navigate perhaps less than ideal relationships with porn, how to even figure out if you have a less than ideal relationship with porn. And I want to be really clear up front that we're not going to come at you with any kind of shame talk or say that you're bad for watching porn or that you're bad for having sexual desires. I want to celebrate actually sexual desire throughout this episode and celebrate sex. Sex is amazing. Sexual desire is amazing. And it's totally understandable to want to watch porn because it's incredibly alluring and you can see any sexual thing you would want. So just want to normalize that up front because I've watched a lot of porn. I've had a problematic relationship with porn. My guest today, Jeremy, he is a man who specializes in helping men identify whether or not they have a problematic relationship with porn. And then if they do, he helps them figure out what to do about it and come into a healthy relationship with their sexuality, their sex lives, so they can thrive in sex and relationship and life in general. And that's the frame I just wanted to give up front because it feels important to me because a lot of guys are sort of afraid of, oh, well, I'll just pause there. I think you know what I'm talking about. So Jeremy, I'd love it if you take a moment to just introduce yourself. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, man. I'm happy to be here. And I love the way you framed it. I think it's such an important way to start off this conversation because there is so much, shame in our society around this topic that whether it's self-imposed shame or shame that we get from society around, feeling like a bad person, feeling like a pervert, or feeling like, we have religions or society telling us that we're a bad person if we watch this or want to watch it. And my philosophy on this is just the same as yours. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to watch it, with porn as in principle. But there are times where it can get a little bit out of hand, out of control. It can have some, really importantly, it can have some subtle consequences that some people might not be aware of. And that's some of the stuff I like to talk about. If it's causing harm in your life, how do you have a healthier relationship with it or with your sexuality?
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction here. We're not coming on and saying like porn is bad, never interface with it ever at all. Like you're bad if you watch it. We're saying, hey, if you're curious and you think maybe there might be some impact on your life from watching porn, like let's talk about it. Let's open up the conversation. So I have conversations with a lot of guys about this. And some guys I'll ask like, what is your relationship with porn? And they say, oh, I don't really watch it. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, I just watch it a couple times a week. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, usually like maybe 3 or 4 times I watch porn every week and masturbate to it. And so then I'll ask, okay, well, why are we talking now? Like what's happening here? Why are we having this conversation? Well, they're having these problems with my sex life and my relationship is, and the connection isn't quite happening. And I totally relate. Like that was my life when I was earlier too. So you are somebody who has actually gone on your own journey with this. Is that right?
Yeah.
Could you share a little bit about that just to give us some context to understand who you are and why you're doing what you're doing?
Yeah. My relationship with porn started, early in my life. I remember when I was, I think the earliest was actually looking at comic books. I remember certain comic book characters, just turned me on. I was, I don't know, maybe 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. And I remember certain characters that just really kind of started making me feel good in my body. And that was my first kind of exposure to imagery that turned on something sexual inside of me. And that gave me a little hit of like, wow, I feel powerful. I feel energized. I feel some fire inside of me. That escalated and moved on to things like lingerie catalogs that would come in the mail. Once we got dial-up internet, we had AOL, we would, download photos and it would come line by line. And it was all the evolution that was kind of beautiful back then that kids today don't really understand because they just have high-speed internet porn. But for me, it started, early on and slowly escalated. I remember, being 13, 14 and looking at porn in the living room while my family was asleep and, hiding it and all these things. And then it kept escalating to the point where when I was in college, I was watching, and this was when internet was really coming alive, and you could get more access to these tube sites where you could find tons and tons of content. And it was getting to the point, endless variety, any niche, any genre, things you didn't even know existed, at the tip of your fingers. And it got to the point where I was looking at porn every night for anywhere from 1 hour to 3 hours. And sometimes it could be a couple times a day. Sometimes it was just once a day, but it was very much a compulsive habit, a daily habit, that I never questioned, because it was something that I developed so early on in my life. It just seemed like it was normal. It was something I did every day.
Yeah.
I kept it in secret, didn't tell anyone. I was so ashamed of it. I couldn't tell any friends, any family. Any mention of porn made me feel really uncomfortable. And there was always this kind of, feeling of needing to hide it, needing to clear my browser history. Oh, if people knew what I was watching, they would think I'm a pervert. So there's this deep sense of shame around it, despite the fact that porn was very normalized. People could joke about it. And so that's kind of a little bit of my background, just where I found myself. It's slowly escalating.
And before we get to how did you kind of turn the page? I'm curious, with hindsight 2020 vision, when you look back at that period of your life, could you say from your perspective now, like, what do you think the impact of that was on your life at the time?
Wow, that's such a good question. There's so many subtle impacts that it had on my life, the ways it impacted my own, image of my body and kind of body insecurity and body dysmorphia, the way it impacted my expectations of my partners, the women I was pursuing and the women I was sleeping with, and the ways that I had these altered expectations of what they should look like and what their body should look like and what sex and intimacy should look like. But on a more subtle, fundamental level, like the heaviness of shame that I carried around, of this feeling like I had something to hide, like I was doing something in private that was gross or wrong or, needed to be hidden from others. It built up this internalized shame within me that I think, had long lasting impacts on my life. That sense of just feeling kind of broken, not good enough. So that's one of the deepest ones, is the wounds of shame. You called it the mountain of shame. Really powerful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And were you dating people or being sexual with people at the time?
Yeah. It kind of manifests in different forms for different people. Some people, because of, problematic porn use, they might eschew real relationships and not have any kind of real romantic interactions. For me, I had both. I was addicted to porn, but I was also addicted to pursuing women, addicted to sex. So that was kind of my flavor of it. I was having partners and having regular sex, but I was also addicted to that, addicted to the pursuit of novelty in my relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can relate to that for sure. And I remember hearing that you also at one point became a monk. And I'm curious, like, what was that because of this? Was that related to this? What was the trajectory that made that happen?
Yeah, that me becoming a monk and ordaining came a little bit later. So I'll just kind of back up and tell you the turning point for me, which was when I realized that this was a problem. It was back in college. I had just graduated university. I was at UC Davis at the time, studying genetics. And I stuck around for an extra year doing research. And there was just this one kind of normal day in my life. The blue sky was out, sun was shining. I had a great life. I had a lot of friends. I was a stellar student, had amazing grades. I would end up going to grad school for genetics. So ostensibly, everything in my life was really wonderful. And I remember walking down the street this one day in Davis, California. I was in front of a Pete's Coffee, and these two girls started walking in front of me. And I was just so consumed by this feeling of lust. It just completely took over my mind, and I just couldn't help but feel this strong lust and desire and craving for these girls in front of me and for staring at their bodies. And I remember in this moment, it was so pivotal for me because it just felt like this huge black hole opened up inside of me where I felt like nothing I had was good enough. And I had no kind of feeling of gratitude for what I had, no feeling of appreciation for what was good in my life. All I could feel in that moment was, I need to have sex with those girls in front of me. And unless I do, I can't be happy. Like in my mind, it was just, that is where my happiness is touching and feeling and having that and acquiring that. And it made me realize just how much my mind had been taken over by lust. And that this feeling of lust, which is different from desire, desire, sexual attraction, desire, we can talk about that. But lust is this feeling like you need to have that. And if you don't have it, you can't be happy. And what I realized is that is a state of suffering. I mean, that really is what suffering is when there's something that you want and you crave it and you lust after it and you can't have it. And what it kind of helped me realize is just how much of my life was suffering. And a lot of it was caused by porn. And so that ended up causing kind of an existential crisis for me in my life because I figured, okay, I have everything I've ever wanted. I have good grades, a lot of friends, great life, and yet I'm still not happy. And it made me really question, what is happiness? Like, will I ever be happy? I keep having sex with all these different women. I keep having sexual pleasure, but it's not leading to real happiness. And so that then led me down a rabbit hole of finding these books on positive psychology and neuroplasticity. And I ended up finding this one book on Buddhist meditation from Mathieu Ricard called Happiness. And that book just totally opened up my eyes to the concept of happiness. And I fundamentally kind of realized that happiness is not just about having more pleasure and experiencing more pleasure. Like that's, so it's kind of funny now, but that's really what my strategy for life was. It was like,
100%.
Okay, let me just run around and get as much external validation and sexual pleasure and good food and dopamine hits, and that should make me happy.
Yeah.
And this book just opened up my eyes to the fact that happiness is so much more about these internal things, like inner peace, compassion, connection, community, living with integrity. And one other thing I'll just say about that, because it was really pivotal for me and pivotal for a lot of the guys I work with, is the understanding of neuroplasticity. And there was this one quote from the book that just changed my life, and it was a quote from a neuroscientist, and it was, "Neurons that fire together wire together." And it just really helped me understand that every time I was logging on to porn and lusting after these images on a screen, lusting after, bodies, I was hardwiring these neural pathways of suffering, of craving and lusting. And I was creating the conditions for my own suffering. So that was really kind of transformative for me to realize, oh, I'm the one doing this to me. I'm the one that's causing myself all this suffering.
Yeah.
And through meditation, I could actually rewire my mind and cultivate different neural pathways.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the turning point for me that then led me to becoming a monk.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that. That's awesome to hear and learn about you. And I want to clarify and sort of crystallize this one theme that you're speaking to that's so important because, the difference between what you're calling lust and desire, right? Because men might be listening and thinking like, well, I think women are so sexy, or men or whoever you're attracted to. Like, and I see them, I'm just like, wow, like that, what a beautiful like person. I want to have sex with that person or like talk to that person, etc. And I think that the key nuanced difference is when you or I or whoever it like externalizes their own feeling of wholeness or self-worth, makes that dependent on connection with the outside person, like I need them to be okay. I need to have this experience to feel worthy, to feel whole, to feel complete. Like when that element is there, that's when I think it turns problematic in my perspective too. And that's, I think, what you're speaking to. I just wanted to say it again, because I think it's one of the main points to really understand about like how we're viewing people and how our sex drive and interest system works. You know?
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, when you said when it becomes dependent on, when your happiness, your sense of being okay becomes dependent on acquiring that person or sleeping with that person or whatever it is. You know, another way of phrasing it, which I really felt when I was deep in my addiction, and a lot of the people I work with talk about it this way, is feeling enslaved by lust. Like it becomes the master and you are just at the whim of your desire, where it just pulls you around and sometimes causes you to do things that you are not really in integrity, or that you later on regret. You kind of wake up, you know, that post-nut clarity that we sometimes joke about. There's some truth to that sometimes. It's like the moment we orgasm and we say, oh man, did I really just like chase after this, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And if you're listening now and you're thinking, well, I don't feel like I have that level of an extreme experience, but I do watch porn and I'm still curious, like if it's negatively impacting my life. I think there are a lot of subtle ways that does happen that can sort of fly under our radar too. You know, I think back to when I was really, I'll call it addicted to porn as well. Like I wasn't aware that was happening at the time. I wasn't aware that it was like subtly controlling my desires. I wasn't aware it was making my partner seem less attractive to me, or I wasn't aware it was impacting how I viewed women in general. Like all this stuff was kind of happening underneath the surface of my awareness. And it was like slowly kind of like picking apart my identity as a man and my overall experience of happiness, you know, confidence, etc. You know, so it took a little while, and it took some digging and it took some uncovering. And the key factor for me really was realizing at a certain point too, like, oh, I am actually not happy with my life. Like I am having sex. I have overall objectively like a pretty good life, but like there's something that's not quite right. Like what is it? You know, and then started to examine all these things. And I'll save more of my story for later, but yeah.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the thread there, which is the subtle consequences. You know, if there's somebody listening, like, you know, if you're listening to this or watching this and you're thinking, well, I don't feel enslaved by porn. You know, I watch it a couple times a week and do my business. What's the big deal? There are all these subtle ways that it impacts us that can be very hard to spot unless you're kind of trained to look for it, or if you have a high level of self-awareness. But some of it is just on a purely physiological level. You know, the way it impacts our dopamine systems, when you're constantly pushing on that dopamine button, it becomes hard to take joy and pleasure in simple things in life.
Yeah.
You know, drinking tea outside and feeling the sun on your face. So part of it is that, just the way it can screw with our dopamine system. But then, as you say, the way that it impacts our expectations of our partners. And this was something I really was a wake-up call for me, that I noticed I was getting so perfectionistic with my partners. Because every time I logged onto porn, I was searching for exactly the kind of niche and genre that I was most interested in. And I was scrolling through hundreds, thousands of videos a night, trying to find the perfect video to finish on, you know? And that was just cultivating this sense of, oh, okay, the person who I'm going to share my sexual energy with, to release my sexual energy with, needs to be perfect. They need to have just the right proportions. And it created, you know, these unrealistic expectations that then made it harder for me to really deeply appreciate the humanness of a real partner I was with. You know, if they had like a little bit of belly fat or body hair, or, you know, it's like all these, just the realness of being with a human being. When you're used to porn every night, you know, just a real human kind of like, oh, I prefer just porn because it's exactly what I want. There's no risk. You don't have to worry about getting rejected. There's so many different, we could spend a whole hour talking about the subtle ways that this screws with kind of our masculine energy and totally. Our life. But yeah.
Yeah. And I want to get into like what can we do about it, but I want to share a couple other things first. One thing that I'm really grateful for Pornhub about is they do this thing called the Pornhub Year in Review. I don't know if you've ever looked at this. Have you heard of this? It's fascinating.
I know
It's
Spotify
fascinating.
does it for podcasts, but
Yeah. Well, so Pornhub, they have, like, you can go on their website and look at this just long list of all these statistics about what people are watching, how often people are watching it, the breakdown versus male versus female, the breakdown of like what different terms people are searching for, the times of day people are looking for things, like the days of the week. It's mind blowing. And so there's just a couple that I want to share right now, because when we talk about or ask the question, what are some of the subtle impacts of things? There's some impacts that I think are really affecting society that we might not even think about. Like here we were just talking about, it impacts your perception of sex and how you show up with your sexual partner and relationship, etc. But I think there's also a whole other thing going on. So for example, when would you guess, Jeremy, the most common time is that men watch porn? Time of day?
good question. I would say either like 10 p.m. or like 11 a.m.
And why?
A lot of times it's like a distraction or break or procrastination from work, kind of like need to deal with some stress at work, and guys will kind of sneak away to watch a little bit. Or a nightly thing, also it's the dark hours of the night, getting away from your partner.
Yeah. And then what day or days of the week do you think would be most popular for people to watch porn?
Yeah, Monday, Tuesday.
Why?
Friday.
Why those days?
Maybe not Friday, Monday and Tuesday. Just the kind of the. I might be totally wrong.
But I'm just curious.
To know,
yeah, I'll tell you what's coming up. But
yeah. But I would guess, a lot of times it's like work stress. It's like a lot. One of the things we could talk about later. So much of addiction isn't about sexuality. It's about all these other things in your life. It often has nothing to do with sex. It's like an escape mechanism, a coping mechanism. Yeah. So I would pick these times that are like, you're stressed at work, a lot of deadlines coming up, emails flooding in. That's why I would guess those times.
Yeah. Well, you're pretty spot on, I would say. So the most common times for men to watch porn, it starts at 10 p.m. They have a graph. Maybe I can overlay it on the video for the YouTube version, but basically it like at 10 p.m. it's like spikes up. Then it gets higher at 11 p.m., like significantly higher. Then the most common time overall is midnight. And then 1 a.m. is still pretty high too. It's higher than 10 a.m., but not as high as at midnight. And the most common day is Monday. So Monday nights. And so for me, when I think about that collectively, and I think about the impact of just picking up your phone, which is what most people are looking at porn on, like right before sleep, the hours before sleep, it's going to mess up our sleep for the night. If it's on a Monday, it's going to like fuck us for the week, not in a good way, and we might not realize it that much at first, but it's definitely going to like shift how we show up Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning too. And whatever you look at right before you go to sleep, it gets imprinted in your brain more so than things that you look at throughout the rest of the day. And that's why there are certain therapeutic activities, if people are trying to increase their confidence or self-worth or self-love, that therapists will say, like, do this actually right before you go to bed and then go immediately to sleep, because, neurons that wire together or that fire together, wire together, and that you can sort of anchor or seed your brain going into the sleep world with positivity. But if people are seeding their brain every night with this, it's sort of like an extra punch to the system, Yeah. And just like, wow, that's intense. And also to think about, there are massive traffic drops on New Year's Eve and also in the United States on Thanksgiving, which to me means that, when there's connection available, people don't use porn in the same way.
Yeah. I'm so glad you highlighted, getting back to this topic of just like subtle consequences, sleep being one of them. Like if you're using it, at night, it's wild to me how many of the guys I talk to who will, I'll ask them about their life, what's going on. And they say, struggling with porn, and I'm also struggling with sleep, and I'm just not sure why. Like, I thought I sleep really well. And then it turns out they're like watching an hour or two of porn just before they go to bed, and they're wondering why they're struggling to fall asleep at night.
Yeah.
And I definitely have that experience of how strong of an imprint that is on the mind when you watch something at night. Like for me, I would watch 1 hour of porn, and I remember very vividly, closing my eyes sometimes and just seeing the porn still playing kind of behind my eyelids.
100%.
And when you bring that into your sleep, it has such a strong impact on the mind.
Yeah. It also makes sense why people would be more likely to watch porn at night too, because my understanding of willpower is that, or, mental fortitude, self-discipline, whatever you want to call it, it's something that actually fades through the day as we use it. So generally by the end of the day, humans have less ability to say no to the things that they know aren't as good for them. Like that's just a researched thing at this point too, so a little bit of compassion there. But
yeah, we could get into the topic of willpower. This is actually something I was just talking with my community about. Yeah. There's some really interesting research that actually kind of disproves some of that.
Oh, really?
That willpower is
me.
not really limited. Okay. Well, there was this, that was kind of the prevailing thing. We would tell people like, oh, willpower is a limited resource, so you can't rely on it for your recovery, which is true. Like you don't want to just rely on willpower if you're trying to break a habit and, all this stuff. But Angela Duckworth, was it Duckworth? No, somebody else. It was the lady, who wrote The Mindset. Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck did some research looking at willpower and whether or not it was a limited resource. And she actually found that willpower is not a limited resource. It actually doesn't run out the more you use it, except for one group of people. It does run out the more you use it. What's interesting is the group for which it runs out is people who believe that it's a limited resource. It is a limited resource for. So your belief about willpower impacts how much willpower you have. If you believe, willpower is limited, the more I use it, the less of it I'll have, then that will be true. But if you believe that willpower is not limited, that it's actually kind of unlimited, and the more you use it, it actually strengthens your willpower muscle, that will be true. So this is really important because we actually kind of need to share this and like let people know, hey, if you actually approach it in a different way and say your willpower is a muscle, it can grow stronger the more you use it. That can actually help people feel more of that sense of willpower and self-mastery, which is it's fascinating. That being said, at the end of the day, there are other factors that lead to that, like being hungry and sleepy and tired. That does impact your ability to make good decisions.
For sure.
I would say a bigger thing, though, is that the reason nighttime is so often why people use it is one of the things that leads to people acting out with porn is feeling like they're kind of alone or isolated and they can get away with it. And the nighttime tends to be one of these times where they can sneak away, get away, and feel like it's their own little escape.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you for sharing something new with me. That's awesome. I love that. Yeah. I love shifting my own beliefs about what's possible. That's great. And there was one thing I wanted to say. It was just there. What was it? Can you say that last thing you said? Do you remember what you just said?
What did I just say?
Porn, late at night, willpower.
There are other things like being hungry and angry and tired that can lead to bad decisions. Willpower being a limited resource, or that your belief about it can change.
Well, we can come back to that. I'm sure it'll come. Okay. I'm sure it'll come back again. So I want to ask you, in a different part of hearing you speak, I heard you say, addiction isn't the problem. This is a quote, like it's the attempt to solve the problem. You also said like porn addiction isn't just a bad habit. It's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So could you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I wish I could take credit for that quote. That was actually Gabor Mate who said that. Addiction isn't the problem. It's the attempt to solve the problem. But I think it highlights something that is so important for us to understand, that porn is not the problem. Alcohol is not your problem. Whatever kind of drug it is, isn't the problem. the addiction is the attempt to solve the problem, which is there's some underlying pain, some underlying discomfort that's going on in your life. And the addiction is your attempt to medicate and to soothe that underlying distress. And that's so important. You know, we talked earlier about kind of normalizing and giving a little bit of compassion for people who are struggling with this. And, you know, if you're out there listening and you do have a problematic relationship with porn, if you are struggling with it, to recognize porn isn't the problem there. You know, the addiction, it's your attempt to solve some underlying unmet need that's going on. And that's, again, why porn addiction has very little to do with actual sexuality. It taps into our sexual energy and our sexual system, but it's really about coping mechanisms and learning how to deal with pain and discomfort. And that's where, you know, getting into mindfulness and learning these tools of self-compassion and mindfulness are so important for overcoming any bad habit or any addiction.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about that piece, the piece around like the coping mechanism, because you worked with a bunch of guys at this point. I think you've said there have been hundreds of guys that have gone through your porn recovery program. Is there a theme that you've seen with men around this, like the underlying, you know, like what are the needs underneath this, or is it all over the map?
Yeah, it's all over. I mean, there are there are a lot of commonalities that many men experience. Loneliness is one. Fear, anxiety, but it really is all over the map because it's the human condition. It's when this is what addiction is, running away from pain. You know, it's an inability to sit with your pain and to be at peace with, hey, there's discomfort here, there's pain. Whether it's just the pain of boredom, which is a painful experience. It's an unpleasant experience. Boredom is one of the biggest triggers for guys, right? They're sitting there, they're bored, you know, they don't want to be bored. So they're like, okay, let me just look at porn. If you know how to sit with discomfort, sit with something unpleasant like boredom and just say, oh, I'm feeling, you know, bored right now, but that's okay. I don't need to fix this. I don't need to medicate this. The same with any other unpleasant emotion. Fear, loneliness, anxiety, self-judgment, self-hatred. It's like these are all just negative emotions that when they arise in our system, subconsciously, we don't actually see this or process it, but subconsciously what's going on is we experience this unpleasant emotion and we think, oh, I don't like this. I got to get away from this. Let me find something to numb out, to escape, to kind of smooth this over. And so for some guys, it's porn. For other guys, it's, you know, junk food. Some guys, it's video games. It can be any coping mechanism. And that's why, you know, on my podcast, like it's about porn addiction, but it's really not about porn addiction because it doesn't matter if it's porn or alcohol or junk food or whatever. It's the ways that we kind of try to escape unpleasantness and just numb ourselves out. And for a lot of guys, it happens to be porn, but it really doesn't matter. And that's kind of gets back to the point. The addiction is not the problem. It's the attempt to solve the problem, which is that feeling of, I need to get away from this emotion. And that's where the practice of equanimity is so important. This, you know, the practice of just being there with what's happening. Like, oh, okay, I'm feeling lonely. That's okay, you know?
Yeah. So we'll get tactical or practical about that.
Yeah.
Talk to me about equanimity. Like why, like you've said a little bit about why it's important. Like, how do we do that?
Yeah.
That sounds like a hard order. Like, oh, if I'm just sitting there, I'm bored. So easy to pick up the phone and look at one of 200 different things, you know, like what do I do?
Exactly. I mean, well, you nailed it. It's so hard to do in our society because we are so conditioned to having a quick fix, to having some stimulation, some distraction. It's at our fingertips wherever we go. You know, our phone, we just pull it out whenever we're feeling unpleasant, some kind of emotion. And it is so hard because it goes against all of our societal conditioning. All of our society says, make yourself happy all the time, feel good, have, you know, more pleasant things. And so it's going against the stream to say, I'm going to learn how to actually just, when there's something unpleasant in my system, to make space for it, to be with it. And it is there is a peace that is deeper than any kind of sense pleasure. Like the amount of inner peace that you can experience when you're truly coming from a place of equanimity, of just, oh, I'm okay with things as they are. Not grasping after things you want and not pushing away things that you don't want. And you're just like, oh, right now it's like this and that's okay. That's what real inner peace is. So in terms of how to do it, it takes training. I mean, this is getting back to neuroplasticity. It's if you can start to experience more moments of equanimity, you're strengthening the neural pathways of equanimity. And a lot of what mindfulness is cultivating equanimity. So for example, a lot of people know what mindfulness is. You know, they might have some understanding. Okay, you close your eyes, you feel the sensations of your breathing, and when your mind wanders away, you come back and feel your breath again. That's one example of mindfulness with mindful breathing. What's really important about that, if you want to cultivate equanimity, is the way that you pay attention to the breath and the way that you come back to the breath when you get lost in thought. Because what's really important is to cultivate this quality of non-judgment. Like there's no aversion and there's no craving. So when you're feeling your in-breath and your out-breath, you're not hoping for a deeper breath. You're not hoping for, oh, let me have some yogic breath. You're not hoping for a deep transcendental experience. You're just there with your breath as it is. That's equanimity.
Yeah. So, and is this something that you encourage people to do whenever, like throughout the day? Or is this something you encourage people to do like certain practice times of, like sit down and do this for 20 minutes? And then also when you're in line at the grocery store? Or how would you speak about that? Yeah,
definitely. And the reason for that is like, we call it dedicated versus integrated practices. So dedicated practice is like, I'm going to schedule time every morning, first thing in my morning routine, I'm going to sit down for 5 minutes and cultivate mindfulness in this dedicated way. And it's also critical, if not more important, to do the integrated practices of actually bringing it into your day-to-day life. If, you know, for the guys on listening to your show, it's like if you're out at a bar and you see this really attractive girl and you just start to get filled with this lust, you know, and you start to have some amygdala hijack going on where your amygdala is just saying, you got to go, you know, talk to her and you got to get her number and you need to make it happen.
Yeah.
If you can in that moment say, oh, okay, I'm feeling a strong desire right now. And that's okay. I don't need to be consumed by this. That's an example of an integrated equanimity practice. Like, oh, right now it's like this. And that's the same for any strong emotion. Frustration arises.
Yeah.
You could say, oh, okay, frustration. Oh, this is unpleasant, but it's okay. Like, I don't need to get reactive and act out on this.
So when guys go through your course or working with you to start breaking their unhealthy patterns with porn, do you encourage a regular mindfulness practice like this? Is this part of the curriculum? This is like, you don't do this program without this kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say, you know, I'm not dogmatic in the sense of like, you must do this and this is the only pathway to freedom. But self-awareness, because that's really what mindfulness is. Self-awareness and it's mental, it's self-mastery. You know, it's cultivating self-mastery over your mind. It's very hard to have a deep kind of recovery and to break free from compulsive autonomic autopilot behaviors if you don't have some self-awareness. Like, there's this quote that I'm sure you've heard before. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's misattributed to Viktor Frankl, but it's actually Stephen Covey summarizing Viktor Frankl's work. But it's this quote: between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. And it's like so many guys don't realize, between some stimulus, you see a hot girl, and your response, like most guys, there's no space there. And it's just, I see a hot girl and oh my God, I got to go talk to her. And boom, my amygdala is hijacked. And next thing I know, I'm looking at porn, right? There's actually space there. And if you can access that space, it gives you the power to choose how to live your life. To say, oh, there is an attractive person over there. Do I want to go talk to her?
Yeah.
And if you do, then you can, but you can do it from a place of integrity and grounded presence, not from a reactive, hungry dog hungry ghost kind of place.
Yeah. When I think about this, and to make it personal, when I've experienced it in the past, it feels almost like there's a hook that grabs me and involuntarily pulls me towards this thing, whether it's the computer to look at porn or whether it's the woman in the grocery store or whatever. It's like, whoa, like it like pulls me off of my feet. You know, it's not a conscious choice. And at times I've even watched my body acting as if it's a movie. Like I'm observing the actions that I'm doing without even choosing to do them, in a sense, you know, like it's happening on autopilot. And that's like, it's very different from feeling the stimulus, taking a breath and realizing, oh, I think I would like to go talk to that person. Let me do so intentionally. Like there's a big difference there.
Totally. I mean, that's why I call my podcast Unhooked, because it is that feeling of just being like, we get hooked by these things and they take control, and it's not a fun way to live your life when you're kind of enslaved by these emotions.
I'd like to take a moment during this episode to let you know that this podcast is made possible without sponsors or advertisements because of all the men who go through my Orgasmic Mastery course and through my in-person retreats. Thank you to all those men. And I want to let you know also that there is another 10-week large group Orgasmic Mastery course happening later this year. And I have 2 retreats coming up later this year as well. The first one of those is for any man who wants to integrate his heart and sex into a really powerful, fun, pleasure-filled, sexually confident life. And the second retreat is for any man who's in some form of a leadership position or a position of impact or influence in the world. That could be an entrepreneur, that could be a yoga teacher, that could be a retreat leader, that could be a manager in a company. Any man who wants to really refine himself as an instrument of creation, so you can more powerfully create the things that are important to you and create the kind of world you want to see, and to have fun in the process of it too. It's going to be an awesome, awesome time. And I will put links to all 3 of these things in the episode description. So without further ado, thank you again to all of these men. Thank you for being here. And let's get back into today's episode. So I want to ask you another question and share a little bit about a practice I've been doing recently and hear your opinion on perhaps these different forms of meditation. So just personal context and backstory. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know. Last year, about 6 months ago, we had Hurricane Helene that came through here. It was a literal disaster. Like it destroyed all kinds of shit. Lots of people died. Trees fell all around my house. My neighbors, next door neighbors almost died. I still see like the damage when I walk out my door all the time. It was really intense. I'm still doing hurricane cleanup work here at my house. And what I didn't realize was that I'd never, like I've gone through hurricanes, but I've never actually been in a legit natural disaster zone before. Like I had friends almost die, and I had friends who held people while they died because of the crazy shit that was going on here. And so like in the field of the social fabric of Asheville, and myself included, there was a overall just sort of like kind of depression that happened and an anxiousness that built up and a freneticism after we got out of that immediate survival month, you know, and many of us didn't have fresh water. I think it was like for 4 or 6 weeks, didn't have power for weeks afterwards. It was really wild. So there was, of course, that initial survival, like adrenaline spike. And then there was this period of realization of, oh shit, like it's different now. Like life is different now. Our favorite places are destroyed, et cetera, et cetera. So what started to happen to me and my own mental health started to suffer. And I started to get into less good habits with social media use and news consumption and distracting. I didn't even realize it, you know? And I remember going to a therapist, maybe 3 months ago or something, because I was like, man, I'm just not feeling good. Like this sucks. And talking to them, and they kind of normalized it for me and said, oh yeah, pretty much everyone around here right now has some level of low level depression or anxiety or PTSD, something from this storm. And yeah, whenever now we have strong winds or there's like a severe weather watch, like I treat it differently. Like it feels different in my body. Like we had a windstorm the other night, and I remember laying in bed like, oh fuck, like this is actually a form of PTSD, like anxiety, nervousness, etc. So I share all that to say that I recognized my mental health was not in the ideal space. So a bit ago, I decided, okay, I need to recommit to a meditation practice. And I said, okay, I'm going to do 30 days of it. And I did 30 days of it. And I did more than that. I ended up going 45 until I got a new puppy. And then it kept me up all night. And then I broke my streak of daily morning meditation. But I share all that to just to give some context for how like my mental health kind of got hooked, if you will, and derailed a little bit. And then even myself, as somebody who has had a history of a fair amount of meditation and yoga and mindfulness practice, getting back into the daily practice of meditation was really challenging for me. Like the actual subjective experience of sitting down for 20 minutes in the morning, because this was my practice, sit down for 20 minutes, do a basic breath pattern, just be present with what is, you know. The first 10 or 12 days of that were absolute hell. Like internally, it was very challenging. I had lots of thoughts. I had lots of resistance. Most of the time, my body was like, just get up, just do something else. Like, this sucks. This is horrible. Why aren't we stimulating ourselves? You know, it took me 2 weeks, I would say, before I started to get the little glimmers of, oh, that's nice, you know? And then it didn't even fully land, I think, until about somewhere later in the third week. Again, is where it actually dropped me back into this space of, then I had a fully enjoyable 20-minute sit, you know, and thankfully I knew that this was the sort of thing that wasn't going to immediately be pleasurable, you know, and I knew that it was going to take a little while to get in there. But I just share that to say, like, I'm somebody who has a lot of background with this stuff. And even still, it was challenging for me. And it took me almost a month to experience the actual joy of it. But then sure enough, what I noticed was throughout the rest of my day, like things just seemed a little brighter and I felt more happy overall and more content and more alive. And yeah, by like day 45 of doing this every day, like there was just a different, like, it's like I'm experiencing reality differently, you know? And I know that's probably not a surprise for you to hear at all, but it's kind of hard to explain to somebody who hasn't done something like that. It's like, there are more colors in the world, you know, or there's more space with breath. I was talking with a buddy of mine last year about this at some point. It's almost like you figure out how to slow down time. Like meditation is the time hack. You know, you want to live longer, just figure out how to do meditation and you actually subjectively experience more in the same amount of time as other people. So I just want to pause there and see, if you have any thoughts or inspirations or reflections based on that.
Yeah, so much. I mean, first of all, thanks for sharing, you know, being a bit vulnerable. I think it's so helpful for people to hear that, you know, even for those of us who have a lot of experience, it can still be, there are times where we've got a strong routine and times where we fall off. And it, you know, takes energy to kind of get back on it. And it is challenging. And just as you shared, it's like, there's so, you know, I've been fortunate enough to have seen so many deep life transformations from people just implementing mindfulness into their practice and the ripple effects on the rest of their life. Like, I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. They think it's just a calming technique, or, okay, I'm going to sit down and follow my breath and I'm supposed to feel calm for 5 minutes. But the true beauty of it is the way that it ripples out into the rest of your life and gives you, as you say, presence, like to actually experience the beauty of your life, you know, the vibrancy of colors and the feeling of the wind on your face, to be alive and to be a human again. Yeah. And the way that it gives you your choice back, you know, like your ability to choose how to live, to say, oh, you know, I actually can be intentional in this moment, or I can act with integrity in this moment, or I can choose to walk down a different path that's going to lead me forward. There's so many benefits. And for anyone who's listening right now, you know, if you're listening to this and you've never really gotten on board with meditation, it kind of sounds like spiritual mumbo jumbo, whatever. I get it. Like my background's in the sciences. I was always very allergic to anything that felt spiritual or woo woo. You know, I hated it. But to understand that it's just a way of reclaiming your life and being present. And there's so much power in it.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean you always need to be meditative all the time throughout your day. Like you can still do wild and crazy shit. You can still go skydiving. You can still play basketball. You can still do whatever with your friends. You can still have crazy, wild sex, you know? It's just like a little seed of intentionality to sculpt the kind of consciousness that would be beneficial for your life.
Well, not only that, sorry to cut you off, but it makes all those things like 10 times better. Like if you're having amazing sex, but you're lost in thought, or you're, you know, thinking about how you're not good enough or whatever it is, then your subjective experience of that is not that great. But if you're fully present and you're engrossed in all the smells and just there for the experience, it's so much better. And the same for all of our experiences of life. It just, it's like it unlocks so much to be present for your life.
It does. So there's probably guys listening right now who are on board and they're like, tell me what to do. So Jeremy, like, give me a prescription. What do I do for how long? Just for fun, you know, like, what would if I wanted to try this for 2 weeks or 30 days, or what's a certain time length you would recommend trying this for? And what would you do during this time? Like, it's like just a basic introduction. And when could you say you would probably start to expect to experience some benefits?
Yeah, it's a great question. These days, there are so many incredible apps and technologies. I mean, I have a course called Mindfulness Made Easy, but there's also a gazillion other courses. There's apps, there's Headspace, there's Calm, there, you know, Happiness app, so many different places where you can just really easily get into it. So I would say just find, you know, go on the App Store, find something. You could check into my course. You could just go on YouTube and look at some like guided meditation playlists, finding some playlists and then finding some teachers who you resonate with. You like the way that they speak. You like the things that they say. You know, for me, I, again, was always allergic to kind of like these sounds in the background and like a ethereal voice of some ladies, you know, just kind of, it always felt kind of like,
breathe into your crown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like, but the thing is, some people love that. And if you love that, then find something like that, find a teacher that you resonate with and just, you know, do it for 30 days. Follow a bunch of guided meditations. Some helpful tips here is start small, you know, even 2 minutes a day. Like consistency is much more important than doing a marathon 1 hour meditation once a month. Like that's what you want, is the consistency of reminding yourself to be present on a daily basis. And even if it's 2 minutes in the morning, you can slowly build that up to just being present for 5 minutes in the morning. The more present you can be, the better. And the more you will have a natural overflowing into your life.
Yeah. So I want to circle back around and say, like, we're on a podcast ultimately talking about porn and unhealthy relationships with porn. And we've just talked about mindfulness for a little while. And so in case anyone has forgotten, the reason we've been talking so much about mindfulness is because it's actually a really huge step and helpful component to, if I'm, you know, using your words correctly, like figure out what to do in that moment between stimulus, when we get the urge to look at porn or the urge to follow our unintegrated lustful desires, and our response. Like, what do we do after that? And cultivating this mindfulness will give us extra space there and extra ability and strength to make a decision that's more in line with what we actually care about and want to create. Right. So this is a practice that takes some time, but has very tangible and scientifically established benefits.
Yeah. And, you know, getting back, I'm glad you kind of brought us back to the whole purpose of this podcast. One of the things that you mentioned earlier on is, how will a guy know if he has a problematic relationship with it? Yeah. And I think there's a lot of guys out there probably listening to this right now who are on the fence. They're not sure. They maybe have a feeling like, something about this doesn't feel super healthy, but how do I know if it's actually a problem? A few things that can be helpful there. So one is just, first of all, see if you can take a break for 30 days. You know, if you can take a break for 30 days and it's not much of an issue. It's pretty easy for you. That's a fantastic sign that you don't necessarily have an unhealthy relationship with it, that it's not something that's kind of hooked into you and you use it in a compulsive way. So that's a good sign. Most people will struggle if you have some kind of a regular porn habit. It's not that simple, to break free from it for 30 days. Yeah. And so then you have to kind of start to do some self-awareness and say, okay, what are the ways this is actually impacting my relationship? Am I being less present with my partner? Is it impacting, am I objectifying women? I mean, there's all these studies showing how on a neurological level, this one study showed that when people are watching porn, the areas of their brain that are associated with viewing objects are lighting up rather than the areas of their brain that are associated with viewing people. So on a very deep neurological level, we are objectifying people and hardwiring that in. So just, it takes some self-inquiry to say, hey, is this problematic in my life? And then, experiment with giving it up and just seeing how that goes.
Yeah. Are there any other signs or things guys should be looking for besides, is it easy for 30 days?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you notice that your tastes are escalating, like if you're needing slightly, even if it's just slight escalation over time, like more and more extreme. And sometimes it's hard to see from one day to the next because you kind of see it every day. It's like, it's hard to see yourself getting fat. You just kind of look at a photo of yourself 4 years ago and you're like, well, I gained a lot of weight. Yeah. Same is true for your sexual taste. Like sometimes you don't realize how far you've gone until you compare it to something from a couple years ago. So if you're escalating in terms of your content or the amount of time you need to watch, another really interesting sign is how many tabs you keep open when you're watching porn. If you're the type that opens a single tab and you watch a single video and you're not kind of fast forwarding and trying to find the perfect position and the perfect scene, that's a great sign. But if you're like many guys, you have multiple tabs open, you're keeping some tabs open to finish on later, you're trying to, thumb through and find the perfect position or your favorite position. This is again a sign that you are kind of developing a bit of an unhealthy relationship with it.
Those are all really good things to check yourselves on. I've done all those things.
Right.
Definitely done all those things. Yeah. There's two things I want to share. So whenever I'm looking over here, if you're watching the video, and if you have not watched some of my videos before, whenever I'm looking over to this side of my screen, it's because I have a little notepad that I'm taking notes on here while we're talking. Like, don't want to miss that part. Just want to give a little window to what's possible in sex life after porn, because, the word objectification was used, and the word objectification can get such a bad rap, and just as a fun little twist, you can actually bring objectification into the bedroom consciously, and it can become incredibly erotic and incredibly sexy and hot and connective when it's done with intention. So say, for example, I'm with a woman in the bedroom and I am able to express my desire of like, hey, I would love to see you just lay down and spread your legs and touch yourself, like pleasure yourself for me. And I'm just going to enjoy the fuck out of watching you because you were so sexy. Like that. Like there's a conscious objectification going on there, right? Like, but the word objectification, like we could geek out a little bit on the semantics of whether or not that's actually objectification. But what is happening there is I'm enjoying the sexiness of them in a way that I maybe would have objectified somebody in porn, but there's connection and there's consent. And because of that, it's like 200 times more erotic and more sexy, and there are ways you can do that. You turn somebody around and like fuck them from behind and love that. And just like get off on their ass in your face with connection, and that's beautiful. And I think some people, especially my younger self, when I was really into porn or problematically into it, there was this, I think there might have even been some sort of fear of, oh, well, no woman's going to want to do the kind of stuff that I find sexy in porn. Like, so I just need to get that on porn. And really what was happening was I was actually afraid of expressing my desire with women. And it was just easier for me to get it with porn. And because I didn't want to upset or I didn't want to like take a risk, I just, watched porn instead. What I've found is that if connection is there and if heart is there, if you have a solid connection with somebody, most people will actually be open to doing most things in the erotic world. Obviously, if they're not, great, like you found the edge and you don't push it. But there's like the palette is very large for what's possible in sex when there's connection and presence and love, even if it's not like a long-term loving relationship. And so I just want to say that too. Like, you can fuck people in doggy style. You can tie them up. Like, you can pee on each other if you want to. like all this stuff. It's possible. It's possible. You just have to lean into the edge of what you desire. And I think you spoke to it a little bit earlier. Like, that's one of the reasons I think a lot of guys and myself go to porn, because it's easy. There's no consequence. There's no risk. You just open it up. You don't have to navigate communication. You don't have to navigate rejection. You get it on easy mode, and there's a reward to that, but it's not quite as rewarding,
It's so interesting you bring up this like the easy mode thing, and it's, I don't know if you ever had the experience of playing video games when you were a kid, but it's like sometimes you could type in this kind of like cheat code and make it so you were invincible or whatever. And the game is so much less satisfying when you're invincible because there's no actual challenge needed. There's no kind of sense of the fragility of your life. It's just like, well, I can just run around, but it's less satisfying. The same is true for intimacy. It's like you can get whatever you want on easy mode through porn. There's no risk. It's at the tips of your fingers. You can just type it in and you get it, but it doesn't deeply fulfill us or satisfy us. And I think that's so important. And I'm so glad you brought up kind of this difference between the nuances of objectification, because it can get a bad rap, and I kind of, just kind of lumped it in there with like, oh, objectification is bad. But as you say, if it's done in an intentional, conscious way with your partner, that's beautiful. You can objectify each other. It's great. My partner and I do the same. Like, she's like, hey, you got a nice butt. And I'm like, thanks. I'm not like, how dare you objectify me, So it can be beautiful. And it's the unconscious objectification. It's when it spills over into areas where we don't want to objectify or where someone isn't consenting and yet we're objectifying them anyway, where it's done in this totally unconscious way that causes some of the harm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if I really tune in, I think there's a little bit of grief that I have around how I think in some ways porn has robbed all of us, all bodies, all genders, of this particular flavor of sex that is the like visually sexy, you could call it the objectified aspect of sex that can be very real and beautiful and connective. Like, there are lots of people out there who, understandably so, like, might not want to do a sexual action because they think it's porn-like, you could call it that. Whereas, like, it's entirely possible for a woman to do a sexy, seductive striptease for their partner and have that be highly erotic and connective and beautiful, but there's this like, oh, this is like porn, so I don't want to do it. And I don't mean to say like to demonize women when I say that. I just say like porn impacts all of us and it gets in our psyche and it can fuck with what we think is normal and healthy and not. And I think it's the net impact, in my opinion, without saying right or wrong, I think it just reduces the amount of pleasure that all of us get to experience because of the imprint that we've gotten from a lot of it.
Yeah. I mean, sadly, I agree. Overall, I think that there's so many ways that it's subtly influenced both men and women. I mean, we haven't even talked, we could have a whole podcast episode about the ways it's affecting the younger generation.
Totally. The
actual kind of ethical concerns about a lot of the big porn sites. I mean, I don't know if you've listened to Lila Micklethwait, some of her interviews. She and an investigative journalist wrote this amazing article in, I think it was the New York Times, but just showing that kind of behind the scenes, like Pornhub there's really dark stuff going on. So much non-consensual rape, kind of underage, sex trafficking, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. We tend to think, hey, it's just Pornhub, it's not a big deal, when the reality is so much of the content on there is actually violent and sex trafficked and rape and underage people without consent having their stuff put online. And it's really dark. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that, but there actually is a conversation to be had about the porn industry and the connection with sex trafficking.
Yeah. And so it's probable that I've masturbated to stuff like that in the past. Like, and
at this point, I mean, it's almost
impossible that I haven't.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and so it's either that or you're masturbating to something that's entirely fake, made to just be stimulating, you know? So, and that I can recognize that might sound a little shamey, but my intention by saying that is just to like challenge us all a little bit and realize like, what do you actually want to be interfacing with your penis, you know, and your sexual energy and your vitality and your life force, like a real human, or something that's designed to be like, that's fake, designed to be visually stimulating to get you off and hook your attention for the sake of making money and advertising revenue, you know, or worse, like sex trafficking and abuse and that sort of a thing.
Yeah.
It's just like, how do we want to interface with that?
Yeah, I want to pick up on something you just brought up, which is, you know, you kind of brought in the nuances of the topic of objectification. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is the nuances of shame. Because shame, you know, as you mentioned at the start of this podcast, this is not a shame kind of podcast where we say, oh, sexuality is bad and you're bad for watching porn. That being said, shame is actually there is a beautiful side to pro-social shame or to healthy shame, in the sense that shame is, in Buddhist philosophy, shame is one of the two guardians of the world. It's the thing that protects us from causing harm. You know, when we've caused harm, it's our shame that protects us and prevents us from causing more harm. That says, hey, that thing that I did, if it was unskillful and was out of integrity, I actually feel the heaviness of that thing. And the shame is there to actually remind me that it was unskillful and to say, hey, don't do that again because you caused harm with your actions. And so we need to really tease apart toxic shame, which is the like, oh, I'm bad, I'm broken, especially if it's misdirected at just sexuality and saying, oh, I'm bad because I'm sexual. That's not healthy shame, that's toxic shame.
Yeah.
But healthy shame is saying, hey, I acted in a way that was unskillful and I feel bad about that. And that feeling bad is a protector. It prevents me from causing more harm. So in some ways, we need to reclaim healthy shame. And if you are acting out of integrity, if you're causing pain for your partner because she wants you to be intimate with her, but instead you're kind of using all your sexual energy on porn in isolation and lying about it to her, that's out of integrity. And there might be some shame associated with that, and to actually tune into that and see, is this toxic shame or is this actually my inner wisdom telling me, hey, there's something to check out here?
I love that. That's super interesting. And yeah, that lands for me. Thanks for adding that nuance.
Yeah. I'm super passionate about, like, it's such an interesting topic because shame gets such a, you know, and rightfully so, it gets a bad rap. Like, hey, we're not shaming anyone because it has gone too far in the other direction. But there's such a beauty to it also. And I think it's a power that we can tap into to be men of integrity, you know?
Yeah. To be able to face the discomfort, you know?
Exactly.
And learn from it. Yeah.
Exactly.
As an information source. So I'm seeing the time and I'm thinking, okay, we need to wrap up. And there's one other piece I want to bring in. If you've got a couple more minutes, you're down for that?
Let's go for it. I'm good. Yeah.
Cool. So this is not something I've done before, but I think it's the perfect conversation to do it in. I was at a workshop maybe a month and a half ago with this guy. I don't know if you've heard of this guy named Dewey Freeman. I'm just going to name drop him because I learned a ton from this guy. He's 74. He's a therapist that's been doing therapy for literally 50 years. You know, he has a whole model of attachment that he's developed. And anyway, like anybody who's interested in helping learn how to work more effectively with men, figure out a way to learn from this guy, you know, like I did, it blew my mind. Anyway, at this workshop, it was brought up, this exercise that happened at a different workshop where men would go into a circle, and each guy would take a turn going into the middle. And in the middle of the circle, they would tell the other guys what kind of porn they liked to watch. Like, and then they would talk about why as a group and kind of get into it, from the sense of like, what are the underlying needs and desires underneath that? So for example, if a guy gets in the center and he says, I really like watching BDSM type porn where the man dominates the woman. So if you take the sort of sexual charge out of that, like what's the desire? What's the driving force? Like, oh, maybe you want to feel powerful, maybe you want to feel like you have control. Maybe you want to feel respected in some way. So maybe that's like an underlying drive that's driving you to porn. Say there's a guy who likes to watch. Well, I'll just do me. Like one of the genres of porn that I really liked to watch a lot of was women just masturbating, but like masturbating in a way that not that they were like, not that they were off in their own world in pleasure, but this other kind of like where they're connected to the camera or the viewer and there's an intimacy there, And I think when I think about that in the past, it's because what I wanted and wasn't getting at that time was like a deep, like erotic sexual intimacy and connection. Like I wanted to be seen and I wanted to be desired in that moment when they were in pleasure. And I was like afraid to ask for those things and get those things. So that was the driving force for me, and I'm wondering, like, does that kind of make sense to you? Have you thought about that or talked about that at all? Like, what are some of the underlying sexual things or non-sexual things that get acted out through porn habit?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Most of the time, but I don't really go deeply in terms of like the client work that I do. We don't really kind of go into, hey, what are you watching? In part, there's so much shame that men are overcoming just to be there that, I know that that's a big step. And sometimes they divulge naturally, like, okay, this is something I want to share, but it's not something it sounds like a really powerful thing to do in that container of a men's space. Yeah. To have that safety and say, we're in a safe space here. And especially if you can build that safety and that trust up first, because I think, jumping straight into that with a guy can be almost traumatic to say, hey, okay, tell me the thing you're most ashamed of and tell me what kind of genre you look up. Yeah. But, I know from so much of the work I've done and the stuff that I've seen that the more that you can create a safe space for a man to open up about what he's afraid or ashamed of, that is probably the most transformative thing you can do to heal shame. To heal the toxic shame is to say you're in a safe space and you can share the thing that you've been ashamed of. That's why, men's groups are so important. It's why I have a men's group, and I recommend if guys can find a men's group in their area where they can feel safe to talk about it. It's so powerful. In whatever form, whatever, like dipping your toe in. For some guys, just admitting that they watch porn is the scary thing. And, but that's a beautiful practice to kind of go into the, like, what do you watch and what was the reason?
Yeah. I think I'm going to try it with my men's group, just my own personal men's group coming up sometime soon, and just see what the effect is, because we have an established relationship there, Yeah. But yeah. And I share that too, because also in the Pornhub year in review content, they talk about like, what are some of the terms that are rising? What are people looking for? And one of the categories that seems like it's really on the rise are categories that are specifically around intimacy between the person on camera and the viewer. So sort of like mindful sex or live like masturbation instructions, or things where it's like there's actually an intimacy, a connection point going on. And I think, without opening up too big of a rabbit hole, I think this is one of the big allures of the OnlyFans world too, is like people feel like they're actually getting a connection with the person, when in reality, they're either getting a connection with an AI chatbot or like a whole farm of people in some other country who are pretending to be the star chatting with them. But the desire there is for intimacy. The desire there is for connection. And I think there's such a loneliness thing happening in the world. And that's one of the things that drives porn use. And so maybe to like figure out a way to circle this all up and wrap it nicely in a bow. I think maybe it's one of your most popular YouTube videos where you say like, well, what are the 3 things that I would do if I was going to start trying to work on my unhealthy relationship with porn. And the very first thing you said was get connected. Like get connected with other people. Like don't try to do it alone. Don't isolate. Don't not talk about it. Like find a men's group, find a program, find a coach, find a buddy, like somebody to have some connection around this topic with. And that feels like such a crucial starting point, especially evidenced by the fact of how much porn people are now looking for that involves intimacy and connection as one of the fundamental things in the porn itself. You know, like we're humans, we need connection. We don't thrive in loneliness. You know?
Yeah. Connection and community really it's everything. I mean, we are social creatures and we need that connection. And particularly men, you know, men were kind of going through a crisis of isolation and loneliness and disconnection. And I think it's so important for us to have spaces where we can connect and be vulnerable and talk about things that are real for us. Yeah.
So I'll take a breath to that. Yeah, good stuff. Jeremy, thanks so much for being here, for having this conversation and going on some of the journey that we've gone on here, talking about this. I really, got a lot out of it. I think people got some great things they can try at home, some good things to think about. I'm curious, is there any last thing that you'd like to add that you would feel like, oh, I need to say this to feel complete here with this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I always come back to is, you know, for any guy out there who's listening who feels kind of uniquely broken or perverted or uniquely fucked up, you know, just to know that you're not alone. It's the most important thing. Like, this is an issue that affects so many people, and whatever you're going through, you're not the only one. So, you know, get connected. And if you can find the courage to let yourself be seen and open up, you'll realize how not unique you are, you know, in some ways. Like, it's just part of human nature that we get hooked on these things. It's because, as you've said, like, our sexual energy is so beautiful and so powerful. Of course, it's going to get hijacked from time to time by big industries, you know. Totally. So you're not alone. And, you know, I hope you find the courage to get connected with a community.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And thank you, listener, for being here with us. Thank you if you're watching on YouTube. It's an honor to share this space with you. And Jeremy, remind us, like, what do you have coming up, or ways that men can work with you? I know you said you had a mindfulness course. What else? What should we know about?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, the best thing is the Unhooked Academy community that I run. This is like the men's group. It's an ongoing program. There's a call every week with the community. And that includes all my online training programs, mindfulness courses, and some of the recovery programs as well. So if you're interested in getting connected around porn addiction or sex addiction, or kind of overcoming some even just slightly problematic relationship with devices, that's a great place. And then I offer one-on-one coaching as well. But yeah, you can just get connected and check out my website if you're interested in more.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. We'll put all those links in the show description. Thank you again. If you have any comments or questions for us, please leave those in the YouTube version of this interview. I love hearing from you. And until next time, Jeremy, thanks so much for being here. And I hope you all have an awesome rest of your day. See you soon.